One stormy evening in late October, Emily, a 22-year-old college student, scrolled through Craigslist, hoping to find a cheap secondhand sofa for her apartment. Her tight budget left her no choice but to venture into the murky depths of online classifieds. She stumbled upon a post that seemed too good to be true, a near-new sofa, listed for only $50. The pictures showed a pristine piece of furniture, stylish and exactly what she needed. The seller, Martin, responded quickly when she inquired, insisting he was moving out of state and needed to get rid of it that night. The urgency felt off, but Emily brushed it aside, eager to snag the deal. Martin's messages were polite and concise, though his insistence on meeting at night unnerved her. He explained he worked long hours and could only meet after 9 p.m. Reluctantly, Emily agreed. He provided an address in a quiet suburban neighborhood about 20 minutes away. Her roommate, Sarah, offered to join her, but Emily waved her off, not wanting to inconvenience her over something as mundane as picking up furniture. The rain poured heavily as Emily pulled up to the house. It looked normal enough, modest, with a neatly trimmed lawn and a moving truck parked in the driveway. She texted Martin to let him know she had arrived, and the porch light flickered on. Moments later, a tall man in his 40s opened the door and waved her in. His smile was friendly, but something about his eyes sent a chill down Emily's spine. "The sofa's in the basement," he said, motioning for her to follow. Emily hesitated. The idea of going into a stranger's basement alone suddenly seemed foolish. "Can we bring it up here instead?" she asked. Martin's friendly demeanor shifted slightly, his smile tightening. "It's pretty heavy," he said. "But if you're not interested, that's fine." He started to close the door as if to end the interaction. Not wanting to lose the deal, Emily reluctantly stepped inside. The house smelled faintly of mildew, and the dim lighting only added to its eerie vibe. As Martin led her to the basement door, Emily glanced around and noticed something odd. No moving boxes, no signs of packing. If he was leaving town, where was all his stuff? The basement stairs creaked underfoot as Emily followed Martin. Her unease deepened with every step. The basement was cold, the air damp and heavy. At the bottom of the stairs, Emily saw the sofa. It was exactly as advertised, but something about the way it sat in the middle of the room, surrounded by nothing but darkness, felt off. "Here it is," Martin said, his voice too cheerful. "Why don't you take a closer look?" He stepped back, leaving her between him and the stairs. Emily's instincts screamed at her to leave, but she didn't want to seem paranoid. She walked toward the sofa, pretending to inspect it, while keeping Martin in her peripheral vision. Suddenly, she noticed something odd. The fabric of the sofa had faint, dark stains, not visible in the photos. Her heart raced as she looked closer. The stains weren't just on the surface, they had soaked deep into the material, almost like blood. Emily turned to Martin, her mouth dry. He was standing too close now, his friendly demeanor completely gone. His expression was unreadable, his eyes fixed on her like a predator sizing up prey. "So," he said, his voice low and devoid of warmth, "what do you think?" Emily forced a smile. "I think I'll have to pass," she said, edging toward the stairs. "It's not quite what I'm looking for." Martin didn't move, his towering frame blocking her path. "You sure?" he asked, his tone icy. "You came all this way. It'd be a shame to leave empty-handed." Every nerve in Emily's body screamed at her to run, but her legs felt like lead. Summoning every ounce of courage, she mumbled an excuse about needing to grab cash from her car and darted past him. To her relief, he didn't immediately follow. She sprinted up the stairs and out the front door, slamming it behind her. As she fumbled with her car keys, she heard heavy footsteps behind her. Martin was on the porch now, his face twisted in fury. She jumped into her car, locked the doors, and sped off, her tires screeching on the wet pavement. In her rearview mirror, she saw him standing in the rain, watching her drive away. Shaken but grateful to be safe, Emily recounted the story to Sarah when she got home. They decided to report the incident to the police, but without concrete evidence, there wasn't much they could do. A few days later, Emily checked Craigslist out of morbid curiosity. The ad for the sofa was gone. Weeks passed, and Emily tried to put the experience behind her. But one night, she came home to find an envelope slipped under her apartment door. Inside was a single piece of paper with only 3 words scrawled in shaky handwriting: "You got lucky." the police never found Martin.
Story number 2.
One brisk autumn evening, Eric was browsing Craigslist in search of a deal on camping gear. An avid outdoorsman, he wanted a good quality tent without the hefty price tag. He stumbled across an ad titled "Top of the Line Tent $30." The price was unbelievably low, and the photos showed a tent in excellent condition. The seller, who signed off as Dave, responded quickly when Eric messaged him, explaining that he'd recently upgraded and just wanted to clear out some space. Eric was eager to make the purchase, especially when Dave said the tent was still available, but insisted on meeting at his remote farmhouse on the outskirts of town. While the idea of driving out to the middle of nowhere unsettled Eric, he figured it was worth the trip. Dave assured him it would only take a few minutes, and Eric, eager to snag the bargain, agreed to meet that evening. The farmhouse was exactly as Eric imagined, isolated, surrounded by dense woods, and bathed in shadows as the sun set behind it. As he pulled into the long gravel driveway, he noticed there were no other vehicles around. A faint unease crept in. He parked, double-checked the messages on his phone, and made his way to the porch, where a dim yellow bulb barely lit the doorway. Before he could knock, the door creaked open, and a man in his 50s with wiry hair and hollow eyes peered out. "You must be Eric," Dave said, his voice gravelly. "Come on in." Eric hesitated, sensing something wasn't right. "Can we just grab the tent? I don't want to keep you," he said, trying to keep things casual. But Dave waved him in. "The tent's out back. Come on, it'll just take a second." Reluctantly, Eric stepped inside. The interior of the farmhouse was sparse, with peeling wallpaper and the faint smell of rot. As Dave led him through the dimly lit hallway, Eric noticed odd details: scratches on the walls, deep gouges in the wooden floorboards, and a heavy lock on what appeared to be a basement door. "Just out here," Dave said, opening the back door to reveal a small, overgrown yard. Sure enough, the tent was set up in the middle of it. "Go ahead, check it out," Dave encouraged. Eric walked out, his unease growing with every step. As he approached the tent, he noticed something strange. There was dirt smeared along the fabric, and one of the zippers was torn. It didn't look like the pristine tent from the ad. Then he caught a whiff of something foul, like decaying meat. Kneeling to inspect the inside of the tent, Eric froze. The ground was stained a dark, rusty brown, and the smell was overwhelming. His stomach churned as he realized he wasn't looking at dirt but blood, dried into the earth beneath the tent. Before Eric could move, he heard the unmistakable sound of the back door creaking shut. He spun around to see Dave standing on the porch, holding a large hunting knife, his hollow eyes glinting in the faint light. "You weren't supposed to see that," Dave said, his voice unnervingly calm. Eric's instincts kicked in, and he bolted toward the woods, adrenaline surging through his veins. Behind him, he could hear Dave's heavy footsteps pounding across the yard. Branches whipped at his face and arms as he tore through the underbrush, his lungs burning with each frantic breath. He didn't dare look back, terrified of what he might see. After what felt like an eternity, Eric stumbled onto a dirt road. A pair of headlights appeared in the distance, and he waved frantically, flagging down a passing car. The driver, a middle-aged woman, let him in without hesitation when she saw the terror on his face. As they sped away, Eric looked back to see the silhouette of Dave standing at the edge of the woods, knife gleaming in the moonlight. Eric reported the incident to the police, who searched the farmhouse the next day. What they found was horrifying: bloodstains, piles of old camping gear, and a series of shallow graves in the woods behind the property. Dave was never found, and Eric was left to live with the knowledge that he had narrowly escaped becoming just another Craigslist horror.
Story number 3.
It was late December, and Melissa had just moved to a new city for work. Between unpacking and settling into her tiny apartment, she decided to look for a cheap bookshelf on Craigslist to organize her growing collection of books. She found a listing for an antique bookshelf being sold by someone named Janet. The post described it as beautiful, sturdy, and full of character, with photos that showed a worn but charming piece of furniture. The price was only $40, which seemed like a steal for something so unique. Melissa messaged Janet, who replied within minutes, explaining that she was moving into an assisted living facility and needed to sell her furniture quickly. Janet's house was about 25 minutes outside the city in a quiet, older neighborhood. Melissa agreed to pick it up that evening. When Melissa arrived, she was struck by how desolate the street felt. Most of the houses were dark, and Janet's was no exception. The windows were pitch black, and the porch light flickered faintly. Melissa knocked on the door, and after a few moments, it opened just enough for a pale, frail woman to peek out. "You're here for the bookshelf," Janet said softly. Her voice was trembling, her face mostly hidden in the shadows. Melissa nodded. "Yes, it looks beautiful in the photos." Janet smiled faintly and opened the door wider, revealing a dimly lit interior. "It's in the living room. Please come in." Melissa hesitated. Something about the house felt wrong. The air was stale, the walls lined with faded floral wallpaper that peeled in places. The living room was eerily quiet, save for the faint ticking of a grandfather clock. There, in the corner, stood the bookshelf. It was as beautiful as it had looked in the photos, with intricate carvings along the edges. Melissa approached it, running her fingers along the smooth wood. "This is perfect," she said, glancing back at Janet, who lingered near the doorway. "I'm glad you like it," Janet said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's been in my family for generations." "But are you sure you want it?" Melissa frowned. "Of course. Why wouldn't I?" Janet's face darkened, her frail hands clutching at the doorframe. "Strange things happen when you keep it. My husband, he used to hear whispers coming from it at night, and after he passed, I started hearing them too. That's why I'm selling it. I can't stand it anymore." Melissa forced a laugh, thinking the old woman was just being eccentric. "I think I'll be fine. It's just a bookshelf." Janet didn't argue, simply nodding as if resigned to Melissa's decision. With Janet's help, Melissa loaded the bookshelf into her car and drove home. She placed it in the corner of her bedroom, proud of how it added character to the space. That night, as she lay in bed scrolling through her phone, she thought she heard something faint, like the sound of whispering. She paused, holding her breath. The noise stopped. Melissa shook her head, chalking it up to her imagination, and went to sleep. But the whispers came back. Over the next few nights, they grew louder. They seemed to emanate from the bookshelf, a soft, unintelligible murmur that sent chills down her spine. She tried moving the bookshelf to the living room, but the whispers followed. They grew more persistent, more insistent, until one night, Melissa couldn't take it anymore. She stormed over to the bookshelf, pulling books off the shelves in a desperate attempt to find the source of the sound. As she reached the back of the top shelf, her fingers brushed against something cold and metallic. She pulled it out, a small, rusted key. The whispers stopped abruptly, leaving the room in suffocating silence. Melissa's heart pounded as she stared at the key, unsure of what it unlocked. That's when she noticed a faint carving on the back panel of the bookshelf, a small, nearly invisible latch. Her curiosity outweighed her fear. She inserted the key and turned it. The back panel creaked open, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside was a tattered leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age. She flipped it open, her blood running cold as she read the first entry. "Whoever finds this, I'm sorry. The whispers won't stop until it's fed. It's not the bookshelf, it's what's inside. Burn it, or it will take you too." Before Melissa could process the warning, the lights in her apartment flickered. The whispers returned, louder than ever, filling the room with an oppressive, otherworldly presence. The air grew icy, and a shadow began to form near the bookshelf, twisting and writhing into an impossible shape. Melissa screamed, grabbing the journal and running out of her apartment. She never went back. Days later, the building's maintenance workers found her belongings abandoned, the bookshelf still sitting in the corner. They left it behind when they cleaned out the apartment, and it remains there to this day, waiting for its next owner.
Story number 4.
It was a humid summer evening when 19-year-old Jake, a college sophomore, came across an unusual Craigslist listing titled "Free Desk, First Come, First Serve." The pictures showed an old but sturdy wooden desk, complete with ornate carvings along the edges. The description read, "Perfect condition. Must pick up tonight." The urgency was odd, but Jake, short on cash and in need of a desk for his cramped dorm room, didn't think twice. He emailed the seller and got an almost immediate response. The desk was still available, and the address was only about 15 minutes away. When Jake arrived at the address, he found himself in front of a dilapidated house at the edge of a quiet, wooded neighborhood. The house looked abandoned. Its windows were dark, the yard overgrown, and the paint peeling off the siding. A single dim bulb flickered above the porch. Jake hesitated, his instincts telling him to leave, but then the front door creaked open. A man stood in the doorway, thin and gaunt, with sunken eyes and a hollow smile. "You here for the desk?" the man asked, his voice raspy. Jake nodded, trying not to let his unease show. The man motioned for him to follow inside. The interior of the house was even worse than the exterior. The air was thick with a sour smell, and the walls were bare, revealing patches of exposed wood and insulation. The man led Jake down a narrow hallway, aced past several closed doors, until they reached a room at the back of the house. There, in the center, was the desk. It was just as it had appeared in the photos, but something about it felt off. "You can take it," the man said abruptly. "I don't want it anymore." Jake asked what he meant, but the man didn't elaborate. Instead, he walked out of the room without another word, leaving Jake alone. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the faint creaking of the house settling. Jake decided to hurry and get the desk out of there. As he inspected it for damage, he noticed something strange, a series of deep scratches on the underside, as if someone had clawed at it. Despite his unease, Jake loaded the desk into his truck and left, eager to put distance between himself and the eerie house. Back at his dorm, he wiped down the desk and set it up against the wall. It fit perfectly, and Jake chalked up the strange experience to the cellar being a weird recluse. That night, Jake awoke to a soft scratching sound. He sat up in bed, his heart racing, and looked toward the desk. Nothing seemed out of place, but the sound persisted, a faint, rhythmic scraping like fingernails on wood. Convinced it was just his imagination, he went back to sleep. Over the next few nights, the scratching grew louder. Jake tried moving the desk to another part of the room, but the sound followed. It wasn't just the scratching either. He began hearing faint whispers too, indistinct and guttural, as though they were coming from within the desk itself. One night, desperate for answers, Jake decided to dismantle the desk. Armed with a flashlight and a screwdriver, he removed the drawers and pried open the underside. That's when he found it, a hidden compartment carved into the wood. Inside was a small, leather-bound notebook. The pages were brittle and yellowed with age, filled with frenzied handwriting that became harder to read as it went on. The final entry sent chills down Jake's spine. "It's trapped in the wood. I tried to contain it, but it's getting stronger. If you're reading this, it's already too late. Burn it. Burn it before it escapes." Before Jake could process the warning, the room grew icy cold. The light bulb above him flickered violently and then went out, plunging the room into darkness. The whispers swelled into a deafening cacophony, and the scratching turned into loud thuds, as if something inside the desk was trying to break free. In a blind panic, Jake grabbed the desk and dragged it outside. He doused it in lighter fluid from the utility closet and set it ablaze in the parking lot. The fire roared to life, illuminating the twisted carvings on the desk, which now seemed to writhe and shift like living things. As the flames consumed the wood, the noises stopped. The air grew still, and Jake felt an overwhelming sense of relief. But just as he turned to go back inside, he caught a glimpse of something in the corner of his eye, a shadowy figure standing at the edge of the parking lot, watching him. The next morning, Jake woke to find faint scratches along his dorm room walls, as if something had tried to claw its way back in. The desk was gone, but the whispers were not.